wanted to have excellence at whatever we did, and we wanted to do it with integrity.
I was interested in your ideas for creating new leaders, because if that's your role as the leader of the company, to create the new leaders in the company, is there something there that you look out for, or a tactic that you use that allows you to spot those people?
First thing I'd say, you can always get a lot of information about the organisation you're joining before you sit in front of somebody on an interview. Don't come in blind and dumb. Your skills will be much easier for you to show if you have some evidence to base it upon, some information that you've drawn. Be open and confident. I think that confidence will come from knowing a bit about what you're heading for, asking questions based upon what you've read about the company. You're already on page 2 of the interview when you do that.
Welcome to the Business Sense podcast. I'm Garry Crosby. This is the podcast where we make sense of the business journey by talking to owners about what they've learnt along the way. Let's jump into today's episode. So I'm here with Malcolm. Malcolm, thanks very much for joining me this morning.
Pleasure.
I'm looking forward to talking about your business journey, and you've done a lot in your career. But I saw, as I was doing some research the other day, that there's a lot of marketing and sales in that 40-year period. Looking back over those last couple of decades, how has sales changed in particular, do you think?
There was always a hanging threat, which was that the salesperson would be phased out because there were so many advances in technology. That was a constant threat. And as we were doing marketing, usually you'd think about what's going to be in touch with the physician most frequently, how can you manage that? And it was always down to sales forces. And every time somebody said we were cutting down the sales force, it didn't happen because no one had the confidence to do it. So that was probably the biggest thing that changed over time, the biggest pressure. Yeah.
And in your experience, when you think about salespeople, it's a bit like when we talk about leadership, are leaders born or made? Are good salespeople born or made?
I think that people either have it in them to become salespeople or they don't. But if you can take a raw person who's more interested in other people than they are in themselves, who has a brain for science or for storytelling, then I think you're onto a winner.
And do you think then that, one of the things that I see with my clients is that practice, if it doesn't necessarily make perfect, but it certainly raises confidence when people go into a sales environment and they're thinking, I don't really mind what the person in front of me says because I now understand what the right thing to say at that point is.
Absolutely. It is about being relaxed enough and alert enough to see where your customer or your client is headed and try and find a journey that you can take together towards something which is of mutual benefit.
Yeah.
It's definitely practice. You can tell people who've come in and never done anything like it because they learn fairly quickly that they've got to be better.
Yeah, but what a wonderful definition we've just got there for sales. So you're the owner of Intercom International, so let's just explore that for now. What does Intercom do?
We're a medical communications company, which means that we take chunks of data, investigate it, turn it into stories that communicate a message which is good for the client and good for their clients, and where possible that can be built upon later with further developments. So try and create a journey for them, which should end successfully with people knowing more about their asset or feeling more confident with their asset or using it more.
And my sense is this is not you creating material for the public. This is inside the medical profession. Is that?
It's mainly inside the medical profession. Most of what drives us is a clinical trial. Either someone who's having difficulty recruiting will turn to us and see if they can pick up their patients more through investigator meetings or through webinars. But just occasionally a client will say, we want the public to understand a bit more about what we do. And we're quite clear we're not a consumer health company. So if that did come up, then there's some we can do, but we would generally refer them to someone who's better at it than we are. Yeah.
And for the GPs out there in the practices and, the drugs landscape is changing around them all the time. Are you part of that process of educating them about what's coming?
It has been something we've done. Most of what we do is a little bit more geared towards secondary or third level physicians, either hospital or senior rare conditions within hospital, but the materials have to be usable for general practitioners because the story has to be basically the same. You can't talk to a general practitioner any differently than you would to a specialist, because quite often they're quite interested in what they're doing and they want to know more.
Yes.
It's just generally the material is geared at hospital specialists.
So Intercom's been going, 7 years now, is that correct?
Well, it's a little bit longer than that. The story of Intercom started over 20 years ago.
Right.
A couple of men originated it. I was one of their earlier clients. And about 7.5 years ago, I had a phone call that said, we'd like to meet you and have a conversation.
Right.
So I interrupted a journey at, I think, Brussels Airport, and there's a coffee shop there, and these two gentlemen sat there and said, well, what we want to do is to talk about whether you'd be interested in buying the business.
Gosh, right.
Which, given I'd stopped on a journey and I was in a marketing position in a pharmaceutical company, was interesting. Not something I thought of that consciously. It had always been in my head that I'd quite like to have a go at it.
Yes.
But to be confronted with two guys who said, do you want to buy the company? Well, it's novel. Quite novel.
So you said yes, clearly.
I
at some
said,
point.
let me have a look, because it's a big deal when you buy a company. And I got to know the general manager of the company, who has a lot of the skills that I don't have. So he and I took the company on. I'm the majority shareholder, but he's also a part of the business. We met up and enjoyed each other's company. He covers the bits that I don't. He's very much a technical expert, and he's very organised. And between us, I often say we're a complete human. So we managed to work it out. And we met and thought, yep, this is a goer. We'll have a do this, and raised the funds and bought.
There we go.
Yeah.
You became an entrepreneur at that point.
Did indeed.
Or a business owner. Yeah. There's a very interesting book called Rocket Fuel by Gino Wickman. And he talks about a visionary and an integrator.
Yes.
And in businesses where you've got someone who's full of ideas, that's great. Often they don't finish those ideas off, and there's a chap or person who walks behind them as the integrator, turning things into reality or discarding ideas that aren't going to work. So it sounds like you've got that kind of vibe going on inside Intercom.
Absolutely. We have a wonderful setup where I will have some things that are buzzing around in my head, and we'll have a conversation, usually early in the morning or later in the afternoon, about whether it's viable, whether we could do anything with it, and whether it's us that should be doing it or whether it's somebody else.
Brilliant.
Yeah, exactly that.
That's good. So one of the responsibilities of a business owner, of an entrepreneur, is to kind of set the vision for the future of the business. How do you do that? What's the way that you set and share your vision?
I think we sat round a table, Ben and I, to think what we wanted to be. And a couple of things were quite clear. We wanted to have excellence at whatever we did. And we wanted to do it with integrity.
Right.
The excellence part was to be as good as we can be. But it was also about carving out where we were going to play and where we were not going to play. Because our integrity starts with, if you want a job done and it's not us that can do it, we're not going to tell you any fibs. We'll find you someone who does know. Yeah. And we've built up over time, over my experience of being in pharmaceuticals, I know a lot of people who can do stuff.
Yes.
I could never set out to do a film, for example, but I know some very good people who can.
Yes.
So that was part of the way we operated, and that was clear from the start. The second was that we wanted to build a business based on relationships with clients that went beyond one job, so that we could learn their business, they could learn ours, we could be more efficient and helpful in what they did, and also be a counsel to them, a sounding board for ideas they might have to move their businesses forward. So that really was our ethos.
And how big's the team now?
18 people, 19. It's an interesting area, medical communications, because it's predominantly female.
Right.
And when you employ young ladies, if you have a happy and good environment for them to be in, then their lives and their families change. And so we have one or two of our staff on maternity leave. So that's been interesting. So it's about 19 people plus a couple who are still with us and are actually out having babies at the moment.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And do they share? Not do they share? Have you shared the vision with them, and is it part of the way they think about their work?
It is. It's clear for them that the relationship with the clients and with each other is very important. I guess a good example, there was a Friday afternoon, and everybody knows that Friday afternoons either nothing, go home early, or everything breaks loose and you've got to get stuff done.
Yes.
And on this particular Friday, one of the team came to me and said, I'm not going to get this finished. It's bigger than I can deal with. And I asked around and a couple of people said, we'll help, we'll get it done. And on the Monday morning, the job had gone out a bit later than we would have liked, but it went out on there. And I spoke to one of those who dived in and said, it was really good, thank you very much. And she said, it could have been me.
Wow.
She didn't say, silly girl, should have thought about it earlier. And that was a demonstration of what it means, that we support each other to make sure something gets delivered on time to the best of our abilities. And there's no witch hunt to say, should have done something different.
Nice.
It's a part of the ethos is placing the challenge on the table and looking at it, rather than saying, what's your problem?
And when I look at clients of mine who particularly they're stepping up from doing in their business to leading in their business, and I know that you've made that step by buying the company, but one of their roles, of course, is to inspire people, and I often say you should inspire people and let them motivate themselves. So what's Malcolm's technique for keeping everybody inspired?
I think my skill, if it's a skill, is to see things that are opportunities, see things which are potentially exciting that we could be doing, and to engage people with those as early as I can so that they can become owners of them and they can develop them, perhaps identify ways in which they can work, or in the team tell me that ain't gonna fly so that we don't do it. But there's always that sense of expectation that we might be doing something new, and the team is flexible and excited by that potential. It's very rare that I get, we can't do that.
That's good, because my next question was going to be about high-performing teams, because, of course, it's a bit of a business cliche, but business leaders who've got a good vision and they're able to inspire their people often end up surrounding themselves with what becomes a very high-performing team. What's your strategy for making sure the team is performing at its best?
Very good question. Very good question. The challenge is not to hire people who are all the same. The first thing you have to do is to make sure you have differences in the team, so that not everybody follows the same book or has the same way of approaching problems, because if that were the case, then you'd find it gets dull. So the main thing about keeping them motivated is having people who are fired off by different things. An example, one of the team who's not been with us a very long time is a writer, but she's very excited about the idea of growing business by approaching new clients. And that's a novel blend of skills. Writers tend to be a little more back office. She is obviously not. So that builds well with some of the others.
That's interesting. There's a very good book written by Matthew Syed called Rebel Ideas. I don't think it's there, but it's definitely in the bookshelf at home, and he talks about why the CIA missed all the signs for 9/11 was the fact that the CIA at the time was a group of people who were, from the same cultural background, of the same age, who had been to the same colleges and played the same sports, and therefore they were very much in groupthink about what was going on. So the idea of bringing different people into the organisation, different points of view.
Exactly.
Very powerful.
And that's very much the guiding principle, is that if you're all the same, you're not going to do anything particularly different. No. I know I have, during my career, been in situations where the management team was all the same. And I remember commenting to somebody, I don't see many women out there. And the lady I was with said, nope, you certainly don't.
So what do you look for then first when you're recruiting people? What's the thing that in that first engagement with somebody or in that first interview, what are you looking for in particular?
Well, typically in a first engagement, my challenge is not to get them too excited about the company they're joining, but to listen to them. So what I look for is somebody who's prepared to open up and talk about what went right and what went wrong in what they've done. I look for some honesty.
Right.
I look for something which is exciting, whether that's simply they've got a background in an area that we've never had before, or it turns out they do something in their private life which is exciting and different. They fly a plane, or they're really good at knitting, or something which says they have a skill that is something they've developed for themselves. So they're able to start off and motivate themselves to deliver something. And then I look for people who are inquisitive about what we do.
Yeah.
But as I said, the big thing is not to sell the company too hard from day one, because you make mistakes. It's easy to get people enthusiastic, but they've got to have that in them before they start.
Yeah. And sometimes I think that, you can look for people and you can find people with a really great attitude, and the skill level might not be quite what you want, but that's still a great hire, because the great work ethic and the great attitude is what you want. The skill can be taught, at a later time.
That's a very good point. And the challenge is you don't hire anybody for the job specifically. You hire them with something further in mind. Nobody wants to do the same thing exactly all the time. Whatever they say, they all look for a change or something that will grow and offers them potential for the further career. So I'm always looking at someone thinking, because this wants to eventually take over the business.
Right.
Or could they become the best thing we've ever had in medical writing? Or could they be really good at conducting interviews in investigator meetings?
Fascinating, because there's two aspects of that, I think. One is managing performance, which I'll come on to after this question, but I was interested in your ideas for creating new leaders, because if that's your role as the leader of the company, to create the new leaders in the company, is there something there that you look out for, or a tactic that you use that allows you to spot those people?
I think my habit of throwing new ideas into the pot all the time tends to discover whether people are going to look at them and see whether they work or not, and come back with a response fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And that's what I look for in people. Even if the response is, no, I don't think it's going to fly, I love that response. But if they think, I think it might if we do this, then that's a signal that there's somebody who may have something to move forward. We're also very open about getting people involved in the management of the company. Right. So Ben and I have a layer of people who are, I hope, developing to be the ones who manage the business, so that Ben and I can do things a little different. I, for example, can move out of the business, and he can spend more of his time doing the parts of it that he particularly enjoys.
Yeah, yeah. That is on the bookshelf, Good to Great by Jim Collins, of course, where he's talking very strongly about the right people in the right seats on the right bus.
Exactly.
Which is often not easy, particularly in smaller companies.
That's right.
So let's go back to managing performance then, because I think things have changed a lot. I think back to my Air Force career, and you were marched in once a year to have your annual appraisal, and there were a set of numbers on a chart, and you were either below average, or above average, and that went off to some central place, and your career was decided on the basis of this. Very rigid structures. I guess today is a bit different. How do you manage the performance of the people in your team?
Good question. It is a challenge. It's made more difficult when you are all working remotely as well. I guess in the military, that's a little bit like when people keep getting posted to different countries. You have no setting against which you can tell what they're doing. So when you're working remotely, it is more complicated. But I think the 2 points that I would look for are, first of all, how does the client feel about them?
Right.
Does the client enjoy working with them? Does the client feel happy and engaged with them? And if I follow that route just one step beyond, things don't always work out brilliantly with a client. Scope creep, or however we want to call it, the situation changes and the job changes. If the staff can take that on board and adapt, then I think that's a very positive sign. And if at the end of it, the client comes back and says, I realise this was a bit more of a monster compared with what we thought, but thank you very much, you did a great job, that's a signal. If, on the other hand, people find it difficult, and it's not just about saying, I don't have the time, it's about saying, I can work with someone to make this happen, then that's a signal that maybe we're not pushing, these people are not going to be able to take it much further. So that's on that side of it. I think the other side of it is when things go wrong, how they pick themselves up and how they whether they can see a way forward. So those are the areas I would look for. So I've always got a kind of record of the way people interact with each other, which is a big deal, and their ability to see way out of it and come to me and say, this has gone really bad, but this is how we think we could go it. It's a bit more challenging when they come to me and say, this has gone really bad. If they say, I need some help, that's okay, that's fine. But it's if they're not able to spot what's going right and wrong in their own way of handling things, that's something we need to work on.
I think we need to flag up the danger signs, and the model that I use is when things go wrong, if what you get as a response is blaming somebody else or making an excuse or even denying responsibility, those are really bad behaviors. But if someone comes to you and says, this has gone really badly, but it's my part of the ship and I'm going to be accountable for it and take responsibility, then that's a good way of spotting people who have got the right attitude for future leadership.
That's exactly what I meant with my picture of an issue where things were going badly. The person had the courage to come forward and say, this is not going well and we need some help. Big deal, big tick in my box. But the other one was, it could have been us, it could have been anybody, which is also seeing it as an organisational challenge, even though the issue was originally somebody having a challenge on their own, to see the bigger picture and to see that we need to move forward together. These are good points.
And I was thinking about the 6-7 years that you've been in that position that you are now in Intercom, and the challenges that you face, because there's been a lot going on in the external environment during that time. What have been the big challenges for you in that period?
Interesting. Some of the challenges were different from what you'd have expected. When the decision was, when COVID first came through, I think that was a big change for everybody. But it hit, and to me it was obvious that this was a major break. This was not just a little cold. This was going to be something really, really significant. And Ben and I talked about it and took a decision before government realised or sensed that it was going to be a big deal. And we closed our office. We put everybody back into a remote situation. We'd had a mini mainframe of our own in the office. We went into the clouds. We gave everybody a laptop and meant that they didn't need to go in the office. So that was a big deal.
Before lockdown?
Yeah. We saw that this was an issue.
It's foresight.
And yes, I think so. But it was important for us to preserve as much continuity for the team as possible. And by moving to a virtual world, we were able to do that. We could keep up our client contacts. We didn't see anybody. We got used to avatars. We adopted Teams very fast and became quite proficient at having meetings, what I call virtual coffee, with a lot of people. So that was a big deal to us. Another issue, our plan had been to become close to a small number of clients, quite consciously, not to have 20 or 30 clients with whom we would work, but 6 to 8 clients. And then you are not entirely dependent on anyone, but if it's your own business and you're not 12 people in 40,000 who have a very large back catalogue, then you need to manage things carefully. But certain things fall beyond your control. And when one of our clients was taken over by somebody else who didn't want to use small agencies, that was a bit of a hole. That does create a gap. And the team didn't panic. They were aware that we had other clients who could work with, but we really had a hit there that meant we had to look for new business and make sure that we were stable and continue to be positive with our clients. And we did, and we lived through it quite well.
And I was thinking as well about, particularly for you as the person, you, Malcolm, the transition from working for somebody else to suddenly having bought a company to being the boss of the company, if you like, the managing director, the CEO, whatever you want to call it. Was that a tough transition for you?
I had been running a strategic marketing team, launching products in a big pharma company with quite a lot of freedom, but the reassurance that at the end of the month there'd be a check coming in and a pension fund that was contributed to, and that would happen whatever. When you are stepping in and suddenly responsible for the livelihoods of 12 people. That means mortgages, it means food on the table, it means payments on their cars.
Yes.
You have to make money. And there were, in the early days, a couple of months when we didn't make enough to pay all the bills, and it was a question of digging into my personal savings to make sure we were okay.
Yeah.
So that's a big change.
That's a massive responsibility that many of my clients
And I was
enjoy.
listening to one of your other podcasts with an entrepreneur who'd started a business. You do that with 12 quid.
Yes.
When you buy a business, and in my situation, when the banks were not interested in helping, it's a big deal. It's an overnight change from everything being done and coming in and you're not having to think about it to how are we doing?
Yeah.
So, big deal.
So let's think about the future then for Intercom. You said earlier on in our conversation that you were thinking about stepping back a little bit. What have you got in mind for the company in the next sort of few years?
The first thing is that we enjoy what we do, and we are already seeing ways in which we can do more and different things for clients.
Yeah.
So the first of those has been how our business comes in. And generally, business has been a conversation in which someone said, I'm really having trouble doing X. Is it something you could help with? And we're building a consultancy kind of approach within the team. So I can see us moving from what I called a three-legged chair, which was about strategic management in a sense, which was client services, to be as good as we can in working with clients, to be writing, because in the end, writing is what we're about.
That's what you do.
But also to recognise that the creative feel of something is important. If you do a good job, it should also look good for your client and the client's client. So there was a three-legged stool. The fourth leg, though, has come along and becomes quite attractive, which is the consultancy piece of saying, we are quite good at answering questions. So let's see whether we can become better at doing that and make it a more obvious skill that we offer to clients. So that's more of an evolution as you become friendly and comfortable and assured with clients. They do just say, this isn't recruiting as fast as we'd like it to. What do you think we could do about it? And give advice on that.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's
I think, where we're going.
A new product, a new place in the market.
Definitely. Yeah.
So I want to wrap up, Malcolm, if I can, by tapping into 40 years of life in business, life in your corporate world, and think about a group of people that I think get a pretty bad rap at the minute. The millennials and the general Generation Z. People say that that they're lazy and they're entitled and all this sort of stuff. I don't believe any of that, but I do meet people who find it difficult to integrate into the working environment and things like that. So I want us to position ourselves in a room where we are talking to a group of 17, 18-year-olds. Maybe they're school leavers, maybe they're university leavers, a little bit older, and we're going to give them some advice on how to make a good first impression. What would your advice be to them about that?
It's a good question. I ran a workshop recently with people who were saying, how do we get Generation G or X or whatever now? How do we get these younger people to come into our thing? And what is it? I think their expectations are more broad. I don't think they're lazy, but I think they've seen that there are lots of opportunities, and sometimes they think that they're talking a different language from the people who are trying to recruit them. So whilst I'm not going to pretend that you should learn all the language that they do use, it's important to have a bit of an understanding about where they are. The world compared with when I started, it was quite straightforward. You were looking for a job that would pay you enough to have a mortgage and you take care of other things outside. Now, you want a more cloverleaf kind of life where, as Charles Handy put forward, where you have a different aspects of your life covering different things. Right. And I think the young today want that kind of thing. They expect more of a world view in the jobs that they do. Yeah, they want to be associated with doing good. Yes. They want to be associated with making a difference. They don't want necessarily to be their whole lives in that particular aspect of work.
No.
You know? No. So I had an interview, or rather conversation with the daughter of somebody I've known a long time, who said, I want to get into helping and working with people. I'm not really sure whether the pharmaceutical industry is a place for me. And I had to say, one of the biggest changes in 10 years is that if you look at the yearly or annual reports of a pharma company, it is full of initiatives aimed at doing good in the world. Yes. And I think that's one of the things I'd say to a young person looking forward is, look at it in a slightly different light, and you will see that the world has changed a bit and you are more suited to it. And don't be shy about it. And I think to companies, it is recognise that people are going to look at all the pages in your book to see whether it's there they want to be.
And I think, we've seen a rise in the B Corp type structure, where people are going to very great lengths to pass the accreditation for B Corp to make it very clear that they've got a company that's sustainable and is thinking about other things other than just profit. So that ties in with that. Yeah. One of the things that we talked about earlier on, which is the attitude, recruiting on attitude and things like that. If you were going to give advice to young people about creating a good first impression around work attitude and work ethic, what would you say to them?
First thing I'd say, you can always get a lot of information about the organisation you're joining before you sit in front of somebody on an interview. Do it. Don't come in blind and dumb.
Right.
Your skills will be much easier for you to show if you have some evidence to base it upon, some information that you've drawn. It's hard to interview people, and if you're in an interview situation, be prepared for the fact you may be better at it than the person who's interviewing you.
Yes.
So don't be too nervous, and don't expect that they know everything about you. Be ready to be open and confident. I think that confidence will come from knowing a bit about what you're heading for, asking questions based upon what you've read about the company. You're already on page 2 of the interview when you do that.
Yeah. And do you think it's worth the young people being memorable in some way, leaving a little hook in you as they leave the room after the interview?
I think it's important that if you have something about you that is important to you, you let it be known.
Yes.
And even if that is, in my spare time, I'm a parachute jumper.
Yes.
Let it be known, because a human is what we're recruiting, and not an automaton. It's easy to find automatons. You're looking for a culture and a style and a personality that will come into your organisation and enrich it.
Yes. Fabulous advice. Lots of great advice. I mean, I feel like we could talk for a lot longer, but time is against us, Malcolm. I'm grateful for all of those. They are nuggets. There are some real gold nuggets in there, which we will obviously bring out when we do the final cut, and will be used to demonstrate your experience in leadership over 40 years. I appreciate very much you taking the time and effort to come and see me today and to join us on the Business Sense podcast.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I've enjoyed this.
Yeah.